Now, the fossil fuel industry is flailing and failing, of course. And guess what? Those dead furrows are not pretty. Everyone lives somewhere. So you look at your own home, the gas furnace, for example. Yeah, there's always a more efficient gas furnace.
Dr. Gernot Wagner. He is a climate economist at Columbia Business School, author of 6 books, including Climate Shock and Geoengineering, The Gamble.
You can't pin this transition on wishful thinking. You can't pin this on, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we found the solution?
You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Mattern, your host. Got a great guest on the program, Dr. Gernot Wagner. Got a amazing show. I've got so much to ask him. He is a climate economist at Columbia Business School, author of 6 books, including Climate Shock and Geoengineering, The Gamble. He is a faculty director of Climate Knowledge Initiative, also a frequent contributor to the New York Times, Washington Post, and Project Syndicate. And he's a specialist on climate economics, policy, and technology solutions. Welcome to the program, Dr. Wagner.
Great to be here.
Is it Wagner, or should we pronounce it Germanically?
Which continent are we on? So, yes. No. Wagner is good. And just to give you a sense of the confusion here. So I have 2 younger brothers, both back in Austria. They are Mike and Rob. I'm the one with this name here in this country, but I'll roll with the punches.
Okay. I was listening to the classical music station and they say Wagner. And so I just was in the mood. Okay. Wagner. Sorry. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of, get a little bit of your background. You're currently teaching at Columbia. How did you end up there?
I actually can proudly say this is the first time I got a job all by myself, as opposed to being the plus one with my wife. So we've basically been moving up and down the East Coast for a bit. And it actually was always me following my wife, who's a gynecologist. So that's how we ended up in New York, at NYU in my case. They wanted her. I got a job too. And then I moved up to Columbia while my wife is still down at NYU. So yeah, I'm basically the climate policy guy at the business school, or the climate policy guy at a business school. And in some sense, well, that says a lot by itself, right? So yeah. Yes, business, of course, is important. I mean, for real, right? At the end of the day, this is all about channeling market forces, guiding investment in a big way in the right direction. How do you do that? Well, making sure that policy guides market forces in that direction, while at the same time, frankly, realizing that none of this is if, it's when, right? Technology is pushing in the right direction. It's not if, it's when. But of course, the when matters a lot. And now we are back to what does it take to make this happen?
Yeah, obviously the Trump's big beautiful bill. I kind of hate even saying it in that way, but it is what it was called. Changed a lot of climate policy, and maybe you can walk us through some of this. And I guess the lens that I would ask you to kind of look at is, well, their argument is, well, if solar and wind are so much better, shouldn't they win the market battle against gas and petroleum and coal?
So there are some differences, right? The finer details between, coal and gas and oil for that matter. But frankly, they are. Just look at Texas. Jeez, thanks to a fellow Austro-American you may have heard of, California came first, right? When Schwarzenegger signed all the right laws into place, California's solar initiative and so on, California took off. Like 2010, 2011, 2012, when solar PV and wind in Texas was basically still more or less dormant. But that picture has changed dramatically. Actually, ironically, it changed like right around the time of 2016 or so. Trump won. And not because Trump suddenly pushed solar. Not at all, of course, quite the opposite. He tried standing in the way back then, too. Meanwhile, we've seen this, well, as exponential takeoff in a state like Texas. Why? Because solar PV, batteries, wind are fundamentally better, cheaper technologies. So in an environment where in some sense nothing is standing in the way, where you can just build, um, that's happening. California is still building more solar too, but it's, if you look at the line, it's sort of a linear takeoff. It's been linear ever since 2011, 2012. Texas came in late and came in big. Okay, back to the big, beautiful bill, which, yeah, is not all that it's made out to be, at least the beautiful part, of course. Um, so in some sense, that's yet again, right? This is an attempt to stand in the way. And of course, plenty of harm that effort is doing, like directly, of course. Um, but frankly, we see that now with all the other stuff, all the executive orders and so on, in addition to this bill, trying to stand in the way of renewables, of solar, of wind, of transmission. Because apparently that's what's needed, right? If you got out of the way, um, there are still incentives that will help, of course, largely because turns out we do subsidize directly and indirectly fossil fuels in a big way still in this country. But never mind the lack of incentives, right? What we see now is executive orders saying, thou shalt not build renewables. Again, why is that necessary? Because on a level playing field, solar PV especially, but not just solar, wind, batteries too increasingly, would win. And yeah, if you have the infamous $1 billion Mar-a-Lago campaign dinner, right? I mean, the dinner didn't cost $1 billion, right? But it was something like, right, if you, dear fossil fuel industry, give me $1 billion, I'll make sure to make you whole. And the fossil fuel industry is flailing and failing, of course. And guess what? Those, debt falls are not pretty. They are not. If you basically have the world's most powerful, most profitable, in many ways, in the narrow sense, right? Externalize the costs, internalize the profits. If you have that industry looking at its more or less certain demise as an oil and gas focused industry, yeah, that's not a pretty sight.
Yeah, certainly. Anytime an organization or societal situation is going through a death rattle, it's grabbing, it's grasping, it's doing whatever it can to hold on for as long as it can. And I guess kind of pivoting a little bit, but not too much, to the you've written about this, the manufacturing of solar panels in red congressional districts. In major solar manufacturing is going on in those districts. What do you think that it will stop, slow down? What will happen as a result of this big, beautiful bill?
That is probably, manufacturing here in the US, or US competitiveness writ large, is probably the biggest impact of this bill, right? Who's the big winner? China, right? So in some sense, right, from a global climate perspective, we will continue to deploy solar. We will, LONGi, one of the larger solar developers, solar producers, manufacturers on the planet. Um, okay, yeah, because of solar tariffs, fewer panels going to the US, and that has a real impact here for US consumers, US households. That is bad. Those panels are going somewhere, right? And China deployed more solar PV last year than the rest of the world combined, right? All these amazing statistics. Amazing for the world and for China, not so much for US competitiveness, especially US manufacturing, right? So what's happening, or what did happen? Well, okay, again, LONGi, not the only one, of course, but in this case, yes, LONGi, put in some like $600 million investment in Illuminate, a joint venture where it technically is the junior partner in Ohio. 1,500 jobs, 5 gigawatts, 5 billion watts worth of solar PV manufactured in the great state of Ohio, run by a Republican governor, who, of course, right, shows up at the opening and has nice things to say. Of course he would. And yes, big picture, of course, most of these manufacturing facilities, on the one hand, offer the better deployment. Solar, wind, renewables deployment is happening in red districts. So yes, this is what's the matter with Kansas all over again, right? This is basically Republican districts, Republican Congress reps, senators voting against their own districts, states' self-interest, to stick it to somebody, mostly themselves, of course. And none of that is good. So what's going to happen to that one plant in Ohio? I don't know. Big picture, we went in the U.S. from under 10 gigawatts of solar PV manufacturing capacity to 50 earlier this year, which is approximately how many panels the U.S. Americans install these days. So we went, from, not quite zero, but, 5 gigawatts or so in 2020 or so, under 10 in 21, to 50 gigawatts of solar panel assembly capacity in this country. Yes, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. Yes, thanks to subsidies. And that particular sector is hurting, right? So it might still be the case that a plant like Illuminate will, not just survive, but thrive in many ways because, the investment has already happened. And thanks to solar tariffs and so on, tariffs on panel imports, it might still be worth it to weather the storm and keep going. But of course, right, removing investment tax credits, production tax credits, hurts the bottom line of those manufacturers. And that's where the trend will show up negatively. We won't see another Illuminate anytime soon in this country because those credits are gone.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and whether or not market forces pull more investment to those areas or not. Of course, as you said, China is in the dominant position now, and we kind of let them get a further lead. Um, I guess let me play the devil's advocate for a second and just say, well, China's producing a product that is kind of like a commodity. It's not a high tech product. Let them take solar and we'll take AI. What would you say to that one?
Well, you need solar to power AI. That's the first. That's the first answer. And I mean, in some sense, sure. And by the way, Longi as a company isn't doing too well. Why? Because yes, solar PV has turned into a commodity, right? They're a dime a dozen, actually, quite literally, right? They're so cheap. So no, you can't make a lot of money manufacturing those commodities. And to paraphrase a year old by now cover of The Economist, the magazine, solar PV, the three ingredients: sand, sun, and human imagination. Right? And all three are limitless. It's a dime a dozen, so cheap. No, right? You don't necessarily, as an advanced economy, want to jump into that sort of industry. You're not going to um, print a lot of money. Now, that said, there is, of course, a reason. There are very good reasons to want to keep manufacturing capacity or want to onshore, for that matter, manufacturing capacity in this country, in the US, in Europe, or elsewhere. It'll cost more. Yes, there are trade-offs. Well, there is such a thing called the security premium, right? There's a green premium for us climate folk, right? So, certain technologies currently cost more. They do. It's the green premium. Green steel, more expensive. Somebody's got to pay for it to climb the learning curve, slide down the cost curve. No longer needed with solar PV because it is so cheap. There is a resiliency premium, a security premium, whatever you want to call it. There are good reasons to want to onshore manufacturing jobs, to want to keep those manufacturing jobs, green jobs, if you will, when it comes to PV batteries and so on. All that said, back to your question, right? AI, yes, right. So we are suddenly in an amazing bubble on this one, right? For by the way, once again, right, China might figure out how to do things much more cheaply, much better, and already has, right? You even have a better name for it. It's called DeepSeek as opposed to whatever names we come up with, right? But of course, there are more productive uses for investment dollars than commodities like solar PV these days. Never mind that in that case, you may want to get out of the way and let the imports in as opposed to doing both, right? Killing US manufacturing and making it more difficult to import the cheap panels.
We've seen in situations where something as low tech as mining of metals, rare earth metals, has become a big pinch point. And if some future time, if we completely got out of the solar panel business and let the Chinese run it, they could then have another leverage point over us in future negotiations to saying, hey, we're not going to give you any more solar. And it would limit our power growth in the future, which could be devastatingly bad.
True. I mean, okay, now we're talking, there are plenty of factors here, geopolitical factors. And, yes, right? Transition minerals, critical minerals, whatever we want to call them. Yes, there too, China is dominant in many regards. And yeah, right, we should. It would behoove the US, right, to reinvest, invest in this kind of, right, in the right kind of mining, if you will, right? Like, Trump is right now trying to prop up coal mines, right? Okay, good luck. Or basically what we are doing, frankly, is we are propping up the sort of coal mines that are then exporting the coal to the Chinese, once again, making them more competitive without taxpayer money. We are not going to revive coal in this country. It is woefully uncompetitive. Never mind the fact that, we are trying to basically prop up the wrong kind of mines, the coal mines, while, yes, not putting as much emphasis on the transition minerals as we should.
Right. We could spend billions. We're spending a micro, like a few $1 billion on the rare earth minerals when it is such an important piece of the puzzle. We should be spending more on those too. And quite frankly, that might have been a failure of multiple administrations of not just putting the money into it and saying, hey, we have, we, we've seen this coming for decades. This isn't like something that just came out of the blue. Um, Let's pivot a little bit and talk about your being a board member on Carbon Plan, and tell us a little bit about what Carbon Plan does and what your role in it.
Well, it's a small but punch above its weight NGO, I would like to say, carbonplan.org, which open, transparent science basically is the tagline. It's an amazing org doing just that. Yeah, full disclosure, I'm not speaking on their behalf here or anywhere. I am just a board member, but they're doing great work. And especially right about now, right? Open, transparent, and science ought to be mentioned in the same sentence at all times, anywhere, frankly. Uh, well, while U.S. federal science is pulling back in many, many ways, it is, in many ways, sadly, incumbent upon civil society, NGOs, to jump in, to step in. Now, there are plenty of other reasons for a group like that to exist, of course, right? This is not just a reaction to what's happening in Washington right now. Plenty of good work that they have done long before Trump got reelected. And it's the kind of nimble organization that can allow itself to jump from highly important, high leverage, if you will, topic to topic. Again, punching above its weight. It's a tiny NGO, relatively speaking, to the sort of topics it tries to tackle.
So tell us how does it do that?
Well, actually, okay. So here's one example. One of the early claims to fame was Carbon Plan, basically unearthing hundreds of millions of dollars of allegedly fraudulent carbon forest offsets entering the California system. Not, I'm saying allegedly to cover my own legal behind here, but it's pretty darn clear that, well, you can't sell the same offset credit twice, let's say, or you can't claim that you ought to be paid for preserving that particular tree while you had no intention of cutting it down to begin with, for example. Right. And okay, that's of course that's a much bigger topic, right? This is the sort of stuff I do in my day job. This is the sort of stuff um, I focus on, right? What are the technologies, the pathways to actually cut emissions? And, cheap forest offsets are not in that category. It doesn't mean trees are bad, right? Yeah, we need to find ways to funnel lots and lots and lots of money into nature-based climate solutions. All of that is good. Um, but if it comes at the cost of investment into your own supply chain to cut emissions in, let's say, your steel or cement or whatever industry supply chain, yeah, offsets, have all the problems that sort of cheapo get out of jail free card would lead you to believe it has. It's not a way to cut your own carbon emissions. It's a way to tell the world that you did. And of course, that's the really bad trade off, right? What you basically greenwash your own operation. It's not always that extreme, right? Some of these attempts are earnest. Um, I would still say, no, we shouldn't try to figure out how to do this as cheaply as possible, as quickly as possible, while not actually solving the problem, but instead actually put in the money, invest in the kind of technologies that truly cut emissions.
So, what do you see as those technologies that truly cut emissions? Most bang per buck. This is, really up your alley as an economist.
Well, let's start with the building sector. Actually, here we go. Welcome to my my home, 750 square feet, third floor walk up, Lower Manhattan. Um, we spent like $100,000 to cut the gas line in this apartment, in the apartment, not the building, just the apartment initially. Insulate, 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 electrify, 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 and then yes, decarbonize the grid, right? Which is not in my purview as the homeowner, right? Yes, it is a systemic problem, of course, but those first two, insulation and electrification, yeah, it's basically it in the building sector. Right? It doesn't include the low carbon cement and the low carbon steel to put up the building in the first place. But okay, if you have a 200-year-old apartment building, like in this case, 7 units co-op, then yeah, those two steps are electrification and insulation, which uh, okay, the $100,000, right? That's pricey. No, that does not pay for itself in any reasonable amount of time. It's also, of course, not the only benefit, right? Carbon, CO2, climate is not the only benefit. At least the global climate, right? The internal climate here, how much more livable the place is, of course, that is part of the equation. And I should immediately add, so we did this like 5-6 years ago by now. Had we done this now, or had we done it last year with sort of full-on force of the Inflation Reduction Act, yeah, those costs would have been 30 or so % cheaper, in part because of subsidies, in part because the technologies are getting better and cheaper. And of course, right, we could still blow, whatever it is, $5,000 on the top of the line induction stove. I still don't know what the Wi-Fi capability does on this one. But okay, you go to IKEA and you get the $60 induction plate, same functionality. And no, I'm not saying IKEA will solve this for us. Will save climate change, save us from climate change. But yeah, that's a sign. That's a really important sign that not too long ago, the cheapest possible way to boil your water or heat up your food was that $300 contractor grade gas stove. Now it's the $60 induction plate from IKEA. And, well, that's the broader trend, right? These technologies are only going to get better and cheaper, while coal, oil, gas, coal prices, inflation adjusted, have been the same for like 200 years at this point. Um, you're having technologies compete with commodities. And yes, okay, building sector, those technologies are pretty clear. In certain other sectors, cement and steel, there are more pathways than just one. We don't yet know which one is the winner. Um, we sort of have a path toward deploying many of these technologies at scale. We need to get on with it. We need to basically have the right policy mix, the right investments to push in the right direction fast in order to climb this learning curve and make those solutions cheaper.
Do we see, U.S. firms that are in the cement and steel industry and other heavy industries investing in these clean technologies vis-a-vis maybe in Europe, vis-a-vis China? Um, are all of them proceeding in that direction, or who are the laggards? Who are the winners?
Well, in fits and spurts, and this applies to the US in this case. Europe, in many ways, has a structural advantage here because it is actually, in part, internalizing that carbon externality. Right? If you treat the atmosphere like a toilet for your waste, and don't pay for it, then yeah, you can get away with lots of things. So we see the most innovative steel companies, for example, in Europe, um, in fact, be on a path to zero carbon, low carbon, very low carbon steel. Why? Well, because on the one hand, there's a price on carbon. Right? The green premium is lower or non-existent because yes, you pay for polluting. You pay for the emissions that producing steel with traditional methods, coal, blast furnace, and so on, causes. So that's one factor. The second, okay, where are those steel companies? The first one happens to be in Sweden, northern Sweden, near the Arctic Circle, Stegra. Why? Because cheap, low carbon electricity, in that case from Norway. Lots of hydro, some wind, lots of very, very cheap, low carbon energy. Um, and Europe does have a structural advantage there. Northern Europe, in this case, has a structural advantage there. Elsewhere in Europe, disadvantage, high cost of electricity, relatively speaking. Um, and once again, we can look at China, which is doing a lot better than most of the rest of us combined on those dimensions, too.
So, terms of hydrogen hubs here in the U.S., they got started under the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of them are in process. Where do you see those going over the next few years? Are they going to be built out, or do you think the plug has been pulled with the Inflation Reduction? I mean, with the big, beautiful bill.
Well, a plug has certainly been pulled, and that might be a euphemism here for plug power, if you want to go into the details here. But it's certainly the case that green hydrogen at electrolyzers need subsidies at the moment. Because frankly, hydrogen itself is very, very small overall, right? Green hydrogen within the hydrogen business is currently, to put it bluntly, non-existent, right? It is tiny. It takes massive upfront investment. It takes subsidies to get that industry going. Okay, so I hate to always point to China on this one, but yeah, okay, LONGi, right? One of the world's largest solar PV manufacturers, in 2021, by now, formed LONGi Hydrogen. Why? Electrolyzer investments, right? Trying to do the same for electrolyzers, what they managed to do with solar PV. We are like 10, 15 years earlier than we are with PV at the moment. What does it take? massive investments, scale economies to get the cost down on those electrolyzers. 6 out of the 10 top companies worldwide, electrolyzer manufacturers, are Chinese. Actually, surprisingly, 3 of them are European. One only is here in the US. And okay, the big, beautiful bill is now removing the subsidies, the 45V tax credits, that was important, is important, would have been important to get this industry going. Now, what's specifically happening to the hydrogen hubs? Well, same thing in many ways. As long as we understand that federal subsidies need to continue here to get things going, good. And maybe there's some hope here, largely because oil and gas has lots of interest to focus on hydrogen, to focus on molecules, on liquid fuels. But I'm not too hopeful for the U.S. overall here. The 45V tax credits are gone, sadly, as opposed to continuing through 2032, like under the original Inflation Reduction Act.
Well, I saw there was a fairly recent find of hydrogen in France. They were drilling for it and they found this white hydrogen, the clean stuff, and or cleaner. And is there some prospect that maybe all this drilling activity, these oil companies could find more of that, which would be a boon to the hydrogen industry and certainly cleaner energy than petroleum, right?
I mean, it would be, yes, right? And of course, right, in some sense, this is always the hope, right? The hope is to find the white elephant, right? Next up we can talk about fusion, right? But so yes, of course, right? Wouldn't it be nice? And to be clear, right, I don't want to dismiss this at all out of hand. But okay, maybe hydrogen specifically. I think it was 1974. So full disclosure, I was not around back then. But in 1974, the New York Times put hydrogen on the front page of its business section. And I'm, vaguely paraphrasing the headline now, but something along the lines of hydrogen as the way out of the oil crisis. Right? By the year 2000, and we'll have the hydrogen economy, and none of what we currently experience back then in the 70s will matter because we'll have found the solution. Okay, that was 25 years before the year 2000, right? Now we are 25 years after, and it turns out we are once again, in many ways, looking at hydrogen as the solution, or I would say realistically an important solution, potentially important one. You can't pin this transition on wishful thinking, right? You can't pin this on, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we found the solution simply by randomly drilling or by, targeted drilling, maybe, but still. And while, right, turns out there is a pathway to produce clean, green hydrogen. It costs money at the moment. It is not so far out of the money as to be completely unrealistic, right? Pipe dream, wishful thinking, not at all. There are realistic pathways. There are companies putting money toward climbing the learning curve and climbing those scale economies to make the math work. And again, maybe this is not steel in Europe, but so Stegra is deploying massive amounts of electrolyzers, 700 megawatts worth of electrolyzers. By the way, produced by ThyssenKrupp nucera, ThyssenKrupp, German steel company. Right, so Stegra is going to be competing with ThyssenKrupp on steel. Stegra is way ahead here on the low carbon steel front. Meanwhile, they're buying the electrolyzers from ThyssenKrupp nucera, and that the amazing thing here is that we see these investments, right? Billions of dollars worth of investments happening as we speak. Not because of wishful thinking, not because, wouldn't it be nice if we drilled down and the clean energy would just spew out, but because there's a realistic technological and investment pathway to make this transition happen.
Well, I know that the Biden administration was one of their goals was to create hydrogen that was $1, I think, a kilogram, and I don't know how close anybody is to reaching that goal. What's your understanding?
Green hydrogen front, we are not, right? So we are like, $4+, so 4 to 10, $12 or so per kilogram, which is why these $3 a kilogram subsidies for green hydrogen are very much needed right now for that green hydrogen to compete with gray hydrogen, right? We produce plenty of hydrogen as we speak for the petrochemical industry, right? We need it, ammonia production and so on. Where does that hydrogen come from? From gas, right? From a fossil fuel. And of course, it's energy intensive to produce the hydrogen. It's worth it because of the uses in the petrochemical industry. And maybe, to take a step back here, right? So again, hydrogen is sort of seen as, the solution, or this maybe you might be familiar with this infamous sort of Swiss Army knife meme, right? Hydrogen is the Swiss Army knife of decarbonization. Um, okay, yeah, right. I have a Swiss Army knife. I like it. It's a funky gadget. It's amazing, right? It's essential when you're out hiking and you don't have any other tool, right? It's really cool. Um, Here's the problem: it's a shitty knife. It's a shitty magnifying glass. It's a shitty everything, right? Like it's cool to have it all in one, but it's not built for purpose for any one of these uses. Now, I'm not saying that, right, hydrogen is bad at everything. No, uh, but you know, I guess to finish that particular story, the creator of this particular meme has since maybe, more or less disavowed, not disavowed having created it, but basically says, look, this has gone too far. No, green hydrogen is not the solution. Hydrogen is not the solution for everything here. It has its uses at a cost. And that cost currently is definitely higher for green hydrogen than that dollar per kilogram, holy grail of, having sort of the equivalent of grid parity here for hydrogen, right? The equivalent of.
Have we seen the cost curve go down towards that, and are we making really substantial strides on that cost curve, similar to what we saw on the solar and wind front as their cost curves dropped?
I mean, costs are certainly down from where they were, 10, 15, or however many years ago when, it was just a figment of some people's imagination, of course, right? Um, is there a realistic path where you say, okay, with the investments we currently see, we will get that cost down further? Uh, no, not really. Not in this country.
Are the Danes kind of delusional when they say they want to be the Saudi Arabia of wind and create all this green hydrogen and ship it to Germany, or is that a realistic possibility for somebody who can produce electricity cheaply, like the Danes are doing with wind, to create a bunch of green hydrogen and kind of make it competitive with other fuel sources?
Well, it turns out Denmark is the Saudi Arabia of wind, right? What is it? 110% of their demand for electricity produced by wind, right? Yes, right. There is a lot there. Um, you know, is Denmark going to supply hydrogen to the rest of the world? No, it's a tiny country. But frankly, Denmark is an amazing case study for another reason, right? It was, DONG, right? Dong, the Danish Oil and Natural Gas Company, formerly known as that, that has basically transitioned itself over the course of about a decade from oil, coal, including coal, and gas, into, what is it, 80% offshore wind by now? Ørsted, right? Now, okay, Ørsted as a company right now has some problems, in part because of what's happening here in the US, right? Ørsted, like Vestas and others, lost 15% on November 6th, I believe, market value. But yeah, there are corporate transformation stories here, success stories. And of course, hydrogen plays a role in that equation, right? If you do, print cheap carbon-free electricity, are able to produce cheap carbon-free electricity, and you add electrolyzers into the mix, all you need now is water, right? And, is the demand for hydrogen in Europe, in Northern Europe? Hell yes, right? This is This is where all the steel companies are. This is where the ThyssenKrupps of the world are, or Tata Steel for the matter, Tata Steel Netherlands in this case, which, yes, has a plan to transition its entire production, 5 million tons of steel a year, into low carbon green hydrogen produced steel. That takes a lot of electrolyzers. That takes a lot of cheap green hydrogen.
Yeah, and obviously that takes into account that there's a societal benefit to having clean green steel versus dirty steel. And I have to have a full disclosure. I'm on my second hydrogen car out here in California, so I'm kind of a hydrogen acolyte, I guess. But I've heard from others that, hey, hydrogen probably isn't the best source of energy for a car, but it might be better for trucks, for eventually planes and trains and ships, and whether or not you see those numbers penciling out on any of those fronts.
I mean, I'm glad others have told you that, so I don't need to to quiz you on on the hydrogen car. But so yeah, turns out, right, batteries are getting so cheap so fast, and so much better so fast that, yeah, right, much like for buildings, right? It would be nuts to burn hydrogen in your stove to boil the water. We've solved that problem. It's an induction stove. It's electrification, right? And yes, I would say that for light duty vehicles, to speak in the abstract here, electrification is the answer, right? An electric motor, an EV, is simply much, much more efficient than internal combustion engine. Whether this is oil, petroleum, or hydrogen for that matter. So yeah, I would say we've solved that problem. And the battery costs are coming down. Even, what is it, the last 18 months? Again, another minus 50% for batteries. Now, okay, that said, right, what's the extreme end on mobility in this case? It's aviation, right? Yeah, turns out Airbus just pulled back on their hydrogen plane endeavor. So there are real questions there too, of course. But Airbus is definitely not working on an electric plane, right, to cross the Atlantic anytime soon with 300 passengers, right? Electrification there is running up against all the obvious limits. And okay, trucking, shipping is somewhere in between. Now, okay, the cheaper and better batteries get, the more they will be the solution for trucking as well, and possibly even shipping, if you will, right? But yeah, this is where hydrogen, liquid fuels, ammonia, and so on come in, or there might be real potential where electrification is running up against its limits, at least according to where we are today. I certainly don't want to discount that the Swiss Army knife component of hydrogen, right? Sort of looking for and finding solutions that maybe we haven't even thought of yet. There is some flexibility here for molecules that electricity alone does not provide. That said, yeah, light duty vehicles, cars, vehicles, and many, many other uses, household, electrification is the answer.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gernot Wagner, for being on the show. Pleasure talking with you. Kind of nerding out here on economics, and yeah, my undergrad degree was in economics, so I kind of wanna a wannabe economist turned into a lawyer. So great having you on the program. Everybody should follow you on social media and check out what you're doing, as well as supporting the work of the nonprofits that you're involved in as well. Please give everybody what those channels are so they can check you out.
So it turns out it's G Wagner, gwagner.com. That's pretty much me everywhere. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Nerding out is always fun. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Okay, definitely look forward to collaborating with you in the future, and appreciate all the great work that you're doing, and keep it up.
Thanks so much. This was fun.
To learn more about our work at A Climate Change, and how you can help us reach our goal of planting 30,000 trees in the Amazon this year, visit aclimatechange.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. See you next time.